Hey, what's up guys? So about 2 weeks ago we looked at the most unbeatable saw traps. It seemed like you guys really liked that, so today we're doing the opposite and finding out which ones are the easiest to beat. Now, as most of you probably know, the Saw series had some really unbalanced games. Some of them were completely rigged, others were very unfair, and some, like we looked at last week, were just insanely difficult. However, there were a few lucky people who got put in pretty easy traps. And seriously, some of them were almost laughable when you compare it to the impossible ones. By the way, we're not going to be including any competition traps, since that can be a whole other video on its own. One of the easiest and earliest games was Amanda's first test in the original Saw. Now, while everyone else who was put into a trap in the movie had to badly hurt themselves, there seems to be a consensus that Amanda got off pretty easy compared to the rest. She woke up in a dark room with the reverse bear trap on her head. Soon after, she got a message from Jigsaw explaining what she had to do. Amanda needed to go to another guy who was lying on the floor. Then she needed to cut him open and dig through his body to retrieve the key that unlocks the mask. Now, I'm not saying that what Amanda had to do was simple and everyone would have done it. Still, it's probably a hell of a lot less painful than almost any other game in the movie. I mean, one of the more beatable traps in Saw 1 involved a man trapped in a maze of razor wire. We looked at how you can go through there relatively unharmed, but you still actually had to go in there risking injury. But Amanda's trap is not only more straightforward, but the physical pain on yourself is a lot less. However, the one thing that stops it from being very easily beatable is that it has a pretty tight time limit, and it looks like the mask was slightly hooked into her cheeks. We see this later on in an interview, as Amanda seems to have scars on her face from where the machine was sitting. But there were some even easier traps in the newest entry, Spiral from the Book of Saw. Overall, almost every game in that film was relatively winnable. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because the film isn't putting a heavy focus on the traps like the previous entries did. But one of these games is the finger trap. In Spiral, Detective Fitch wakes up in a small pool in this empty room and has a limited time to press and hold a button, which slowly results in his fingers being ripped off. If he doesn't do this, the water level in the tub he's in will rise and eventually reach a wire that will electrocute him. First of all, this trap was pretty avoidable to begin with. In the movie, all the detectives know that the killer is going after them. This means that there is a good chance that Fitch is already a target. And even though he knows this, Fitch decides to walk alone into this abandoned factory at night where he gets attacked. But the design of the actual trap was also a little bit strange, because there's nothing keeping him in the tub, meaning that he can easily buy himself more time by just getting up and stepping outside the pool. Then when the water level rises too much, he wouldn't be in the tub and he couldn't get electrocuted. Also, his fingers seem to be in a special corded wire. It's insinuated that it functions exactly like a Chinese finger trap. We see that these wires aren't glued to his hands or anything, meaning that the same tricks that will get you out of a Chinese finger trap will most likely help you here too. So he can step outside the tub, and then he theoretically has an infinite amount of time to slowly twist each finger out of the wires, and he's free to go. However, this wasn't the only beatable game. There was actually another one in Spiral that was surprisingly easy to beat. Now, in the movie, we follow Ezekiel Banks. He's a detective that works in a police department where he feels like he can't trust anyone. Throughout the movie, he tries catching what appears to be a Jigsaw copycat killer. But towards the end of the movie, Ezekiel ends up in a trap himself. His first test has to do with saving a former colleague. He's chained up hanging from the ceiling in front of a glass grinder. What will happen is that unless Ezekiel can find the key to the guy's chains, the man will die by being shot with the glass shards that the grinder is shooting at him. But there was one mistake made by the killer, and it's that the glass grinder is really easily accessible. It's pretty similar to the pig vat trap in Saw 3. What happens is that there are a bunch of bottles being fed into the grinder, and they all sit up here. What Zeke can do is, instead of finding the key, he can climb on top of the glass grinder and push over the bottles so they don't land in the machine. There isn't even any real hurdle to stop Zeke from doing this, and since the bottle factory is out of order, there's only a limited supply of bottles, and there wasn't a time limit here, meaning that it's beatable without a lot of effort. But throughout the series, there were also a lot of really well-designed traps where you couldn't cheat in any way, but what you had to do was rather simple. And one of those traps is in Jigsaw, the 8th movie. In this entry, 5 strangers wake up in a room with buckets on their heads. They're chained by their necks, and on the wall in front of them are many saws spinning. They will be pulled into the blades by their chains and die in a certain amount of time, unless they can do the given task, and that task is pretty simple. All they have to do is allow one of the blades to touch their skin a little bit, It can be a tiny cut that's not even dangerous and they will move on to the next room. So your choice is, do you want a bunch of massive cuts or a really small one? Now, one of the 5 people doesn't wake up in time and gets pulled into the blades, but then John Kramer decides to save him. Yes, the man was a little bit unlucky since he didn't know what was happening, but there were a lot more unfair traps where John let people die, so it was kind of a weird moment. Anyway, this game is surprisingly painless, and even if you lose, you can still get out alive. Another movie that had a couple of easy traps was Saw 3D, or Saw 7. This was supposed to be the final chapter. Funny how that works out. Anyway, even though this movie had a few absolutely crazy traps, the last one was really easy. Bobby's wife is chained to the floor, and to save her, he must put 2 hooks into his chest and pull himself up to the 2 cords to connect them. But there were so many ways that he could have cheated. As almost everyone has pointed out, he can step onto the hooks and then pull himself up. And since the chains are on a pulley system, you don't even need to be that strong to get up there. He can also connect the 2 hooks and step on them, or climb the various objects in the room to make it up to the cords. The way the trap plays out is that Bobby does everything he's supposed to. He puts the hooks into his body and pulls himself up. But shortly before connecting the wires, the hooks rip out of his chest. This shows how in some traps you kind of have to cheat to get past them. If I were Bobby, I would feel kind of annoyed. He goes through this entire game and follows the rules, and even though he did everything right, he still loses. This is also the case for almost every trap in Saw 5. In the 5th entry into the series, we follow a group known as the Fatal Fives. They're all selfish individuals who only ever care about helping themselves. But in this game, they must work together to live. Unluckily, Jigsaw didn't really make that clear. The clue that they must work together instead of alone was really cryptic, and with the adrenaline rush, it seemed like no one was in the mood to solve a riddle. The group must go through 4 rooms in total, and the second one is known as the Ceiling Jars room. There's a bomb that will go off in a short amount of time. Luckily, there are 3 safe places which come in the form of these long tunnels, but there are 4 people. These tunnels are locked and require a key which can be found in the glass jars on the ceiling. Now, to get the keys, they must break the jars and find the right ones. There are a lot more jars with keys that don't open anything, by the way, so a lot of the pressure comes from finding the right ones. Now, you can probably notice relatively quickly that these tunnels fit way more than 1 person. Each tunnel alone can probably hold 3 guys. So to save everyone, 2 of them can share a tunnel. That way they wouldn't even need to find all the keys. Not only is it much safer and faster, but it was actually the intended solution by Jigsaw. There's also one movie in the franchise where probably every trap is beatable and you don't even have to cheat, and that is Saw 3. Even though the movie starts off with a completely rigged game, all of the tests in Jeff's trial had a simple solution. He's faced with people who wronged him in his life, and he has to decide if he wants to save them. Usually the challenge is pretty straightforward, and it's basically his choice to help them. The issue is that Jeff can seemingly never make up his mind if he wants to save them or not. He starts off wanting to see these people die, but then almost every time halfway through he wants to get them out, but it takes him too long to complete the puzzle and they die. Now, the second test in the movie is called the pig vat. In the trap, we see the judge who gave his son's killer a very light sentence. He's in this pool that will be filled with pig guts until he drowns. Jeff can save him by pressing a button that will burn his dead son's stuffed animals that he's still holding on to. He has to get rid of the toys, and that will save a man's life. Now, the reason I don't have it as the number 1 is because it's probably very tough for Jeff emotionally, and I also don't really count it as a trap because it's probably the most tame out of all of them. But overall, the most beatable trap that I've seen probably comes in Saw 3D. Bobby gets kidnapped and must go through a whole game where he has to save his friends from these violent traps. But the first thing he has to do is make his way out of this cage. It's hanging over these spikes. Bobby must climb up a little bit and pull a handle on top to release the bottom of the cage and then drop down and not get hit by these blades. Now, you can probably see that there are only a handful of spikes which you can easily dodge, and there is so much space in between these things that you can safely drop down in between them. Also, the cage isn't that high in the air, so Bobby can safely work his way down and make his way out. Now, to be fair, this one was built to be easily beatable because otherwise Bobby can't go to the other rooms. I mean, to release the bottom, you climb up on these metal bars in the cage to reach the handle, meaning that you don't risk falling down instantly when the bottom drops. so I think it was meant to be beaten. And at first I wasn't even sure if this counts as a trap, but I looked it up and it seems like it's as much of a trap as all the other ones. So that's probably the easiest trap in the Saw franchise. If I were to be kidnapped by John Kramer, I want to have games like these, since you can make your way out very quickly and then you can write a book of your heroic tale and make a ton of money. Anyway, that's pretty much it for the video, but let me know which trap you think is the easiest. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope I get to see you in the next one. Bye guys.